Hello, my quilting friends! My name is Leah Day, and welcome back to the Dream Big Quilt Along. This week, we're using the Super Slide and Mini Slide rulers once again as we quilt Chain of Pearls on our quilt. This is going to combine ruler quilting along with some regular free motion quilting to quilt the circles. So let's jump on the machine and learn how to quilt this design together. So here is our Chain of Pearls quilting design, and this is really cool because it combines ruler quilting and free motion quilting. I'm going to stitch the curving lines using the mini slide ruler. You could also use the super slide ruler too. And basically just create these channels that are a little bit wider. You can have them taper from a sharp point down to a much wider space. You could have them maintain a consistent space throughout. It's totally up to you. And as you can see, I vary mine and make them all very different in size and shape. And then after you form the channel for your pearls, your circles, then you go in and stitch those circles. And there's lots of different ways that you can stitch those shapes as well. And as you can see, even if your circles aren't absolutely perfect, this still ends up looking great. So let's jump on the machine and learn how to quilt Chain of Pearls. I've already gotten started here in this petal. This is one of our petals towards the center of the quilt, so I hope you can see how this is going to work quilting in a more challenging area. The center is definitely the harder space to work in because you have, of course, more bulk in the arm of the machine. All right, so I've kind of gotten my quilt situated here. First thing I'm going to do is just simply stitch a few curving lines. And the more curving lines you do in between your circle, your kind of gap spaces where you fill those in with the circles, the faster this is going to be to quilt. And that's just a nice quick tip there, because if you're in a hurry, if you're having to quilt more than one panel, then obviously you're going to want to put a few more lines spacing out these gap areas. So I use the ruler to stitch 2 lines here, and then now I'm going to create a gap area. And this is really fun because you can use the ruler in a really creative way. Instead of using any of the etched lines in the ruler, I'm just going to randomly place this, keeping in mind, of course, the 1/4 inch spacing from the edge of our foot to the needle. So however I place this ruler, I want to remember that I'm going to be adding a 1/4 inch here. I like a nice big space to start out with, so this looks good. I'm going to stitch on down, just pushing the whole quilt gently through the machine. Okay, so now I have that nice big gap area. I'm going to drop the ruler and just get my hands nicely positioned here, and I'm going to form the circle shapes. I like to start out with just a partial circle shape, just to bounce across. That kind of sets the stage. And then now I'm going to quilt a full circle. The key to this is visualizing the center of the circle, and you can do that. You kind of have to be looking behind the machine here. I'm kind of bending down ever so slightly so I can see behind, and I'm looking at the 2 lines that we've stitched. It's kind of this channel here, and I'm gauging that distance and kind of visualizing, okay, so if I started a circle here and it ran up against that, how wide would that circle be? And then once I visualize that, then I can kind of identify where that center point is. This is the key to stitching circles in a line like this, is to identify where that center point is, and then as you're quilting around it, it's an echo of that center point. You're not going to stitch the center point, you're going to echo quilt evenly around it. So let's give that a try. This is just one method for stitching circles, keep that in mind. There's another method that works really good for stitching through channels as well. I'm going to teach you that next. So swinging around and then travel stitches, kind of like a figure 8 here that I'm doing. I'm stitching around and then I swing around and then stitch the next circle in the opposite direction. I really like that. For me, it really flows. But if you're kind of like the travel stitching all to go on one side of the circle, then of course you can stitch it differently and have all of them coming and forming the same direction. All right, so you might end up with a little bit of a weird area here at the end. I'm just going to do a little circular-ish shape there just to finish that off. You know, it's just like a little curve there to finish that. I like that look. And then I'll grab my ruler again. So it doesn't take too much time to fill that in. If your space is fairly big, then that means your circles will be fairly big. So that's another quick tip. If you're feeling like your chain of pearls is just taking forever to stitch, then you need to leave yourself more space between those lines of quilting and stitch bigger circles. That really is the key. All right, so now I'm going to travel stitch down. I think I'm going to stitch 2 lines again through this area. I'm just lining this up so that way I can easily see, making those lines nice and curvy. That looks great. And looks like, yep, it looks like this is actually going to keep going. So here's the key with these curving rulers. You can actually butt them together. It's a continuous line. So here I have stopped with the needle in the down position, and I'm approximately 1/4 inch from the edge. So the needle is down and it's lining up with the line that's 1/4 from the edge. So now I'm going to shift the ruler forward, and I'm going to line up the line 1/4 from the edge on this side. And if you line it up nice and straight, then that curve will continue exactly and be consistent with the curve that you had going on before. So these curving rulers are continuous. You can always start and stop 1/4 inch from the ends, and the line will be the same curve consistently. It's also the same curve on both sides too. So you can always stop here 1/4 inch from the end, turn the ruler around, and begin in the middle. And you gotta just play with it. I know it's kind of confusing when I describe it that way, but it really does work, and it's super, super cool when you start playing with it. And here I'll just show you exactly what I mean, because I've got another nice long curving line to stitch right here. So I've stitched over a bit, and I think I'm gonna kind of aim to keep this consistent, maybe about, I'm going to widen it out till it's about 1/2 inch apart, and then I'm going to maintain that 1/2 inch spacing all the way down. So first I'm going to stitch down and stop 1/4 inch from the end of the ruler, okay? So I could take it and go like this. That would work just fine, but I could also take it, rotate it around, and line up the line in the middle of the ruler, and that is going to continue the curve too. So really, really neat. And so I designed the ruler intentionally that way, so that way you would be able to get the most use out of it whenever you're quilting long curves on your quilts. Okay, so again, this time actually I want to show you a different way of filling in circles on a quilt. And this is a different mentality. Instead of filling the full circle, you're going to be stitching only 1/2 of it. So this is kind of cool. So first thing I'm going to do is stitch into the middle of the channel. So I'm kind of just eyeballing my foot in the middle of that space that I have to stitch in, spread out my hands, and I'm going to stitch up the side, and I'm just going to dip in, kind of creating a little scallop shape. I'm going to do the same thing, form a little scallop. We're only stitching 1/2 of the circle this time, not the whole thing. And as you can see, this is a little bit faster because we're not having to do the travel stitching, that's stitching on top of a previous line of stitching to get all the way around the circle and form the next one. So this is a little faster, but you also have to keep in mind you're only stitching 1/2 the circle, so we've got to go all the way down the line one more time. Okay, so this is looking good. These are getting smaller. Of course, they have to get smaller because the space is narrower. And I'm still visualizing my stitching the same way. That center point, I'm still visualizing where that is within the circle so that when I come in with my other 1/2, that's going to be there, and it's going to be circular. It might be slightly on the oval side, but it's going to be circular in shape, right? And that key here is just visualizing that center point. If that is a struggle for you, you have my permission to mark every single circle in this line. You might have to. That may very well work best, and that is exactly how I learned how to quilt circles when I was just starting out. Okay, so I reached the end, and now it is time to match up and stitch the same shape coming down, matching up with those points that we created. So we formed the circle shape coming into a point. Now we need to stitch the second half, and we have something to estimate towards. We're trying to come in and butt up against that line of stitching from before, and then also match up with the point of the circle, create those scallops created before too. So this is where, yeah, careful, slow stitching. It's going to slow down a little bit here. That's okay. The key is to not pause for too long and stitch in place too many times where those circle lines match up, where those points match up, because you can kind of get a glob of thread in those areas and it can build up a little bit. But, you know, just watch out for that. Try to make that a smooth movement. If you're going to stop and reposition your hands, just stop and reposition your hands. Don't keep stitching in place if you're ever confused about a design or you don't know what you're doing next. If your hands aren't moving, you got to take your foot off the foot pedal. That's a major key for free motion quilting. There we go. Now these are getting much bigger, and I can absolutely say this method is much easier for the bigger circles. I think I like the other method better for smaller circles, and that's just, I think, a personal preference. You just got to play with it and see what works best for you. There we go. So all of those circles are stitched. Nice alternative method. I really like that. And you can see that you really can't tell the difference between the two of them. The only way that you would be able to tell is if you accidentally left a gap here between where the circles were matching up, or if you hesitated and stitched in place too long and created a little knot, a little glob of thread in those areas. So if you watch out for both of those things, I think you're not going to be able to tell at all which way your circles are stitched. Okay, grab my ruler once again. Line this up, and these lines, really want those lines to be parallel with the line that we stitched to create that channel. So in this case, I'm definitely going to be using those etched lines to match up the ruler and be able to stitch that beautiful continuous curve. So here we go, stitching down, and it looks like it's just going to come in right at the end. I think I'm not going to need to butt the ends of the rulers together. There we go. That looks great. Let's stitch on down and do one more line, just like so. And I just think adding those extra curving lines parallel, they just really are nice. It's a nice way to break up the design. It's also, I don't know, something about that just adds a little bit more flow and movement between those circles. I think that's really nice. Okay, this time let's actually stitch a nice even chain, a parallel chain. So this time I'm spacing out the rulers using the etched line here to create a 1/2 inch gap that is consistent all the way down. And you may find that this is much easier for you to fill the circles in, because through this area, they're all going to be exactly the same size and shape. We're not going to have big circles and little circles and that kind of thing. They're all going to be the same size and shape all the way down. So here we go, swinging out and around. And I guess I need to have a caveat to that, and that is except here at the end where they are partially cut off by the petal that is overlapping on the other side. So I stitched those. I had 2 kind of partial circles, and now I'm going to come back in, travel stitching around, and this time I'm going to go back to my travel stitching circles. So I swing around all the way around the base of the circle, and it's a figure 8. I swing around to form my next circle, and then travel stitch all the way around it and form the next one. And that's, I guess, another way that you could do this. I guess you could truly figure 8 it, and that would be to swing around and then cross and then swing around again. So it's like a serpentine kind of motion here. The problem that I have, I can already see, is that my circles are becoming very boxy in shape. They aren't staying as nicely circular because I'm focusing more, how can I say that? I'm focusing more on the edges and less on the circle shape in itself. I don't know why, but for some reason, when I did that, I ended up with more of a straight line through these areas. I'm not sure exactly why. Maybe just more practice is the key there, and that would be enough to fix it. So I'm going to travel stitch my way out and give that a try one more time. Might have some weird areas too that we want to sort out within our petal shapes. This is definitely going to be something that happens in lots of our designs. You're going to have weird areas, kind of gaps, strange spaces off to the sides of the petal after you get a nice several chain of pearls going, but then what do you do when you run out of space here on the side? So let's see, I'm going to stitch 2 parallel lines since that's the pattern that I've already established, and then we'll see if we have space for one more chain of pearls. So I stitch that line, travel stitch over, and I'm travel stitching over because this is a 1/4 inch spacing. I am travel stitching over till the edge of the ruler foot is in line with the line I just stitched, with that line I just quilted. There we go. And then now it looks like I have room for a very narrow, see, I could fill, let me show you the space. I could fill this entire space in with circles. I could make it have, kind of taper from a sharp point down here to become wider down at the end. There's lots of different options here. This is definitely kind of a weird space. I'm going to show you how to just fill it with circles. I think that will probably be the best. In this case, at first I'm just going to be bouncing off the edge of the petal shape as if these are much bigger circles. They're just getting cut off by the edge of the petal. I think that looks really good. And then at some point I might say, okay, well now it's as wide as it's going to get, and so I'm going to complete some of these circles. So here I'm going to swing all the way around and form a complete circle. There we go. Might form one more. And then I'm going to have another kind of slightly cut off one here at the very end. And again, if you're looking at this going, I don't know, I don't really understand the rhyme or reason, I don't understand how to make these decisions, please mark it. Once you figure out the spacing, whether you want 3 parallel lines or 2 parallel lines in a row, and then you figure out your spacing of how wide you want these gap areas to be filled with your pearls, and that's all just different choices that you can make, then you can take a marking pencil and fill that in with the circles that you need. So please don't hesitate to mark it. That's a-okay. It's not breaking any rules. I just want you to have fun stitching chain of pearls on your quilt. So that's it for this video. I hope you're excited about giving this design a try. If you'd like to know exactly where I stitched this design on the Dream Big quilt, come and check out the Dream Big Guidebook, available at leahday.com/dreamguide. I share step-by-step diagrams for which designs I stitch in which areas on the quilt, as well as extra helpful tips and tricks for getting started, and more instructions on what I'm doing with my Dream Big quilts. I'm going to be cutting these up and turning them into a quilted jacket. So if you'd like extra information, some tips and tricks and behind the scenes information, come and check out that guidebook at leahday.com/dreamguide. Until next time, let's go quilt.